There we go.
Hi! Yay,
Hey,
perfect. Hi, so can you see everyone behind me here?
I'm waiting for your video to come up. Now it's just, oh, here you are.
There they are.
Nice to see everybody.
Thanks for joining us tonight. So we just had a nice discussion about Up from the Blue, and now I think we all have some questions for you. Is that okay if we start right in with questions?
Yeah, sure. Monica had asked me to prepare a talk,
Oh,
so I did, but I'm really happy to
no,
go.
yeah. Go ahead then. Go ahead and start with that, and then we'll have some questions after that.
Okay, sure. Basically, during the earthquake today, I wrote a little bit about just my journey as an author, and so I'll read that, and then I would love to take your questions. Also, I just got back from Africa. Hope you can hear me. So for me, it's 1 in the morning right now, so I'm a little jet lagged. So here's what I wrote. When I was a little girl, I loved reading, but it wasn't until I discovered The Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder that I was obsessed. I loved visiting her world of bears and corncob dolls and balloons made from pig's bladders. I was particularly struck by Laura herself, the first tomboy I discovered in literature. Later, I would find Pippi, Ramona, and Scout. These were the feisty girls who took dares and told fibs and wouldn't cry if they scraped their knees. Until I read this book, I'd always felt like an outsider, and now suddenly I had company. It was this sense of belonging that spurred me to the library, where I checked out the rest of the series. I then moved on to other authors, thrilled to see a bird's-eye view of the world and to feel the privilege and discomfort of getting inside a head and heart that was different from my own. I loved George Orwell, Shirley Jackson, Zora Neale Hurston, James Dickey, and Harper Lee. Through them I learned that the world was infinitely more glorious and more wicked than I had ever dreamed. If you look at my old writing, and it's all saved in a box back in my childhood home in Virginia, I declared several times that I wanted to be a poet when I grew up. I had not only become a rabid reader, I was also writing stories and poems in my free time. But something in me also fought against the idea of being a writer. Who can support themselves in the arts, and what would people think of me if I really shared my private thoughts and observations? So when I applied to college, I chose a biomedical engineering program, and over the next many years I hopped around a number of sensible fields, science, special ed, psychology, hoping they'd capture me the way my silly and frivolous love for words did. If you peeked inside my car, however, you'd see I wasn't really able to shake my passion for stories. The passenger seat was littered with gas receipts and little slips of paper where I'd written on the backs of them an image or a string of words I couldn't get out of my head. For a long while I was content just writing a story here or there, but then something happened. I began to see this recurring image that kept me from sleeping at night. It was of a little girl with her hand on a doorknob, afraid to turn it. The image haunted me, the way the child clearly didn't want to go inside, and yet she kept circling around that door and pressing her nose against it. I found that I was equally curious and afraid of her opening that door, because some part of me knew what she might find on the other side of it. The child continued to haunt me at night until I started to write the images down. And then more and more images came, and then her voice. I didn't even know I was writing a novel. I had only decided that I was going to accompany this little girl through a door that was part her story and part going back to my own. And sure enough, as I walked with young Tilly through the story of her mother's disappearance, she led me straight to the issues I'd wrestled with for years: unresolved grief and shame, unexpressed love, and the question of what we can hold on to if the ending we long for doesn't happen. Many people ask me why I chose an 8-year-old to narrate such a dark story. And from what I've told you so far, I think you can see that in many ways, the narrator chose and guided me. And if I look back to the books that have moved me the most over my lifetime, many of them explore grown-up problems through the eyes of children, from Scout Finch witnessing racial hatred, to Bunny Morrison suffering from the Spanish influenza that will take his mother's life, to Huck Finn faking his own death in order to escape his abusive father, I think it's important to hear the voices of children facing the harsh truths of our world. And the story is different through a child's lens. She doesn't have the benefit of life experience or an understanding of the big picture. And sometimes she brings a fresh perspective to a story we think we have all figured out. And so I followed Tilly's story of opening the door to her mother's bedroom and making discoveries that turned her assumptions about the world upside down. My goal, when I started, was to bear witness to this child's journey and to acknowledge her grief. What I gained was a newfound sense of tenderness and compassion for all the players in her story. And what surprised me as I dug deeper was that a number of wonderful things were entangled in that young girl's grief. Intimacy, friendship, laughter, courage, mischief, her first crush. It was as if I had to take a close look at the bad to find and rescue the good. And when I finally finished writing this book and had grappled with my fears and grudges and my capacity to forgive and to love, something deep inside me had healed profoundly. The nightmares went away, and I could sleep again. I was no longer haunted. So that's just a little piece of my story. Now I would love to hear your questions and just hear what your group is about.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that with us. Let me see if anybody here has a question and wants to start.
We were curious, I think, just how personal some of this was to you. Like, was it based a little bit on your own life?
Yeah, there was actually a lot of pressure from the publisher to put this out as a memoir, but I had fictionalized too much of it, and I liked playing with truth and fiction, and in some ways I feel like it's easier to tell the truth and go to very emotionally vulnerable places if you put a little bit of a mask over it. So quite a lot of it is my story, but it's quite a lot of it is Tilly's and just kind of just came to me.
We think you're a sensitive, beautiful writer. All of us read it in a couple of days. We couldn't put it down because we were hoping for a happy end. We left the ending a little open-ended, so we weren't sure if it was another sequel or if it's just one, or how we interpreted it. We're not really sure if it was positive, or if she was, how she'd survive had she been a mother, what kind of mother would she be. We were all discussing that in our discussion. Want to comment about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I feel like in many ways, to me, it's a happy ending. I feel like I'm hearing an echo. Because she's able to look back with some compassion and with some understanding of her story and the people doing their best, people making bad decisions for sometimes for good reasons, and I think her fear of whether she could be a good mother, I think a lot of kids who go through trauma wonder how much of it has sort of infected them and their own chance for a good future. So I wanted her to struggle with that, and I wasn't really sure, but I think we saw glimpses that she is more bonded to that baby than she thinks, and she's got more possibility for reconnecting with her father than she thinks at that moment. But I wanted to leave it open-ended because I think life is just kind of like that. And I'm not thinking of doing a sequel. I'm working on something very different now, although I'm kind of, if it comes to me, I will.
The writing was really beautiful. I was reading a little section of the book just tonight while we were sitting here, and the one line where she said, you know, if my mother had only given me a chance, I didn't need perfect. You know, if so many of us would learn that lesson that our kids don't really want us to be, they don't need us to be perfect, they just need us to be there.
Yeah. that means so much to me that you happen to pull that line out. And I cried through the whole last chapter writing it. There was something that I had really not dared, a place I'd not dared to go, and I just decided to go there in the last chapter, and it really felt cathartic, and it felt like she was finally able to say that she really loved that mother. The reader might not, but this little girl really loved her, and her mother had meant more to her and had been good enough. Yeah. Thank you, though.
The way she was.
Yeah. Yeah.
We discussed that although there was illness, the mother's love showed through. The mother's love, the mother's bonding, even naming the baby, naming the little girl. And it just shows through all of it. And I think it's what you just said, what I had said earlier. We just do the best with what we have.
Yeah.
And we hope to grow from it. And I think that's what your book showed to me, too. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I didn't let go of it for 2 days. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I said, "They're morning reading. I'm going to have to push this before I go to work." It's awesome. I really loved it. I really, really loved it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think in terms of doing the best that people can, I also felt that way about the father. I actually left her a little more torn with the father because I felt like if she withheld from the father, maybe the reader would be more generous towards him. But I like that she's kind of trying to be mad, but here he is, and he's so awkward, and he's being there, but he's there. He's not doing all the things she wished he would do. He's not a demonstrative guy, but he's absolutely there for her. And in the end, the best she can offer is she salutes him. And I like just kind of like the awkward acknowledgement between them that they had.
I think the father was one of my favorite characters, and the way you developed his personality. All the characters were wonderfully deep and complex, but we were talking about your decision for the children to discover their mother's death and never comment on the father's response or reaction, and then all the years in between that event and the pregnancy. Was that something that came to you in a flash of brilliance, or?
I very rarely have flashes of brilliance. What had happened actually is when I wrote the book, I only wrote it from 8-year-old Tilly's perspective, and HarperCollins said it's a little tough to not have a grown-up step in at some point and make a commentary. So they said, why don't you try doing a frame story? And I said, no problem. As soon as I got off the phone, I Googled frame story. I was like, what did I just agree to? And the mother's suicide had been told from the 8-year-old perspective at first, and it was actually very freeing to kind of separate that and give a little grown-up distance and show that she probably doesn't come out okay in the immediate afterward, but by the time she's an adult, she's really, I think she's in an okay place. I think for someone who's been through that kind of trauma, she's doing okay. It's curious, I didn't actually think of showing the father and his reaction. My guess is that he stays so buttoned up that he wouldn't have allowed them to see one.
But I thought you portrayed him as actually loving his wife throughout the book. He was very, very frustrated and upset, but I felt that you portrayed that he loved her.
Yeah, I felt that he did, and I felt that he was astonishingly loyal to her. And I really feel like he's somebody who, he honestly didn't know what to do. I think if he knew, he would do it. But I think the times and the military setting, and I think he was just kind of surprised. And so he relied on what had always worked for him in his career. and what had advanced him that way. And that doesn't necessarily apply well to human beings.
Right, and everywhere he went in his daily life, people looked up to him as being the guy who's got it all put together, and the authority, and the person to be respected, and he had this terrible situation at home. So.
Right, and imagine if you're used to being in control and knowing what to do, and you really are swimming, you know. But I appreciate that you felt that way about him. Some of the readers really had a tough time with him.
Susan, I read on your blog that you wrote that you had a difficult experience with the editing process, and I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that, or also the transition between your poetry and this novel form, and how that writing experience was for you.
It's interesting. I actually think the difficulty I had editing came from my strong background in poetry, because the way that I tend to write, I'm not writing the new book the same way, but the way that I've historically tended to write is I'll just think of a couple words I like together, I'll think of an image, and I'll write it down. And so I basically had about a hefty bag full of stray sentences. And it really came together almost like a mosaic. It was quite something to, I don't tend to even think linearly, and so it kind of came in bursts of images and emotions, and it was very hard for me to kind of make a through line. And then to complicate the editing process, when I finally got my first real draft and I felt like it was ready to show to a publisher, I had first, Random House had taken me out for lunch, and they were very interested in the book. And the woman, I felt a little bit like a rock star at a concert, you know, and she was holding the lighter. I mean, she was really like, she was quoting parts of the book. This is an earlier version, and how much she liked it. And then kind of in closing, she had made a comment. She said, I really wonder if you could end the book with this scene of the yellow brick road thing and stuff. And I thought, that's really smart. I'm going to think about that. So I went home on the subway and was kind of looking through my manuscript, feeling all awesome. And I realized what she was suggesting was that I ended the book on page 86 of that current draft. And there were 250 pages that came after that, and she was thinking just kind of slice that and then expand the story this way. I realize I'm doing hand motions that you can't see my hands. And so I actually did that. I just kind of hacked off the book at page 86 and started again. And I did this numerous times where I would take advice from people and just kind of crumple everything up. And I did that so often that at one point the story itself had just disappeared. And I basically curled in a ball for a couple of weeks, not having any idea what to do. And finally, my agent called me, and he just said, I think this story's too hard for you. Why don't you just write something different and let's just stop? And I thought about that for a couple of days, and then I started to get really, really mad, and I realized that I had something to say, and I was going to find a way to say it. So I just locked myself basically away during all the hours that my kids were at school, and I just started over. I didn't even use the original stuff. I just started all the way over again, and about 30 days later I had something that much more resembles this book.
So how long did that entire process take then? About
the entire process took about 6 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So the 30-day process was just kind of, that was actually me being like mad as a hornet and just saying, you know what, I think daring me to throw all that work away and to not say anything and not tell the story was enough to light a fire.
Are you at liberty to say the next book? Tell us a little about it.
Hold on, that got, what was that?
Are you at liberty to tell us a little about your next work? What the theme of it or anything?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about it. It's this one that you just read was a little bit more towards a memoir, and I think I needed to get that story out before I could write the kind of stories that I actually read. But I'm a huge junkie for Greek tragedies and classic Gothic books. So it's much more in the spirit of like Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Wuthering Heights kind of it's like wickedly dark and barren and I'm actually the theme is really taking a really strong and hard look at the pressure that women are under to stay beautiful, but it's got kind of like a Frankenstein kind of twist to it. I'm studying all kinds of things about dead bodies and face transplants right now.
Oh. How do you feel about lasagna? You really dislike it. Lasagna.
Lasagna?
Yeah, in the book.
I really dislike lasagna. It's.
I mean, it's one sense, but it just struck me so. It really, you know, like the meshing, all the different tastes put into one pot.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't actually even know. I must have disliked lasagna for so long and so early that I haven't had it since I was a kid. But when I was writing, I was so in the mind of a kid that I absolutely remembered how I hated lasagna. At the time, it was just kind of like, why did you put all the flavors all together? You know, because I think as a kid, sometimes you just want like the spaghetti with salt on it, and you want it to not touch your vegetables and things like that. And lasagna just kind of messes up that whole process.
It does.
I have another question. Somebody in a little blurb about writing about your book talked about Tilly resembling Scout.
Mm-hmm.
Was that anything that you thought about when you were writing it, or was it just this person's comment?
Well, first of all, when we were getting blurbs, there were about 10 that mentioned Scout, and so we had to start telling people, please don't mention Scout in the blurb. But I take it as a huge compliment. I absolutely love that book. But when I was writing this frame story, after I had Googled a frame story and realized that it's about kind of like in the Titanic, where you take a distance and you kind of show what has happened to the characters and stuff like that. I was talking to a friend of mine, Mark Childress, who is another writer and has also been told by his publishers 3 different times to write frame stories. So I asked him some advice, and he said the best advice I can give you is to keep the voice similar enough so that if they attach to one character, the older character, let's say, they're not shocked and feeling a sense of loss and not wanting to attach to, let's say, the younger voice of the character. So I thought about that, and then I thought, well, who did this best? Who did a retrospective? And I reread the opening to, my kids were both reading To Kill a Mockingbird for school, and so I borrowed their book, and I reread the opening 3 pages probably 20 times, and I was like, how did she do that? How did she do that? And what she did, and I totally borrowed from her, what she did is she starts the book, everyone thinks the book is told by 10-year-old Scout, but she starts the book as grown Scout, and it's such a seamless transition to the younger voice that she allows you to hear a little bit of that older voice and a little bit of that older vocabulary and insight once you get to the younger voice. And it really frees you up to not use baby talk for the book. So while I felt like I could get right into the mindset of an 8-year-old and I could see the world in the limited ways that she saw it, and I saw it from like waist down, and stuff, I also wanted the leeway of having a little bit of play with that adult voice, so that I wasn't tied to the language and the lack of prose that an 8-year-old would have. So I did borrow heavily from that. The way you should reread it, those first 3 pages of To Kill a Mockingbird, you just see she seamlessly brings you into young Scout's mind with the tiniest bit of that older voice still left over.
So speaking of the observations of children, I thought it was wonderfully done to bring out what Tilly thought about her friends and her friends' lives and their homes and their families, and adults do that too, of course, but I thought it was so interesting what she observed and what she thought about their lives and their homes, and how she worried what they would think about her home behind the door. I thought that was very touching and interesting, because we all do that.
Yeah, I meant to have the neighborhood almost be another character in the book. And what I liked about playing with that is that Tilly's story isn't a poor me story. It's really a story of, if you walk into anyone's home, people are just they're dealing with good things and bad things in their lives, and you just don't know as you're waving to people from one driveway to the next, and someone who looks like they have a sense of privilege, or someone you assume is doing badly, like when you walk into Cheryl's home. And it's immaculate and stuff. So all of our notions about people are not necessarily true. We're all human, and we're all dealing with the good and the bad that strikes us. And I kind of like to play with that, so it's not just like this one girl has it so hard. It's really just, And what you might think is her having a terrible time, she misses that mother terribly, and you see at the end of the book that what someone would call a really bad situation, she really longs for.
Would you be able to take one more question, Susan?
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are great. Amazing questions.
Great. We discussed, some of us were wondering about Tilly's behavior as a child, and then also some of her behaviors as an adult, and we're wondering if you purposely wrote in left it open that maybe Tilly has some of the mental illness that her mother had, or some of us read ADHD into the young Tilly, and I was wondering if you'd heard that from readers, or if that was something you intended on, or if you could talk about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. What I was trying to do all along was, of course, the mother has issues, and you just wish that she had lived in another time period, because she was probably not. She probably could have been helped. But what I tried really hard to do with the mother, and I'll get back to Tilly, but was to show that even though she was pretty far on the spectrum of depression, the issues were pretty familiar, I think, to parents who were doing okay. What's it like when your life becomes all about cooking and cleaning and playing children's games, and just, for a lot of people that's not necessarily fulfilling, and some part of the mother had gotten lost, some part of what she used to dream about had gotten lost, and so part of what I was trying to show with her and with Tilly is that they're feeling normal things that normal people feel. They're just kind of ramped up. And so for Tilly, a lot of Tilly I just took from the kind of kid that I knew about. Seemed perfectly reasonable that she would bite people if she was upset, and that and that she'd have a party and no one would come, and that was her consequence. And even though she totally earned no one coming to her party, that's still devastating. And the frame story where she's pregnant, I I don't know if she has mental illness, but I just wanted to show someone absolutely stressed to the point that she starts to fear and the father starts to fear, uh-oh, are we seeing this again? Because I think having to call her estranged father and having premature labor and having people not believe her and stuff made her look a little out of control. But what I mostly wanted to show is that she was afraid of being like her mother, afraid of her being like her mother, because I think that's what a lot of survivors of trauma have to live with, is when they feel normal stresses, it brings about, like, uh-oh, am I going to slip too? But maybe she's going to go off the edge. We don't know. It's a little open-ended.
I hope that.
Anyone else?
Great
Yeah,
character.
we love
Yes.
that book.
We love the book so much. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. It was so nice to be with you guys. I'm so glad you invited me.
Thank you, and we look forward to reading your next book.
Thank you so much.
All right, good night.
Okay, good night.
Bye.
Thank you.